Hello there, warm welcome to On Africa on International Women's Day, coming up on today's show. More than 1 million Algerian women and men take to the streets of the capital, calling on President Bouteflika not to run for a fifth term. We take a closer look at the role of Algerian women in today's protests and in times gone by. Myriam Amelas is with us. France's President Emmanuel Macron hands the first Simone Veil Prize to Cameroonian rights activist Aissa Doumara for her work combating violence against women. Plus, in the 1980s, Burkina Faso's then President Thomas Sankara called on citizens to celebrate International Women's Day. Decades on, some families still hold March 8th sacred. Our correspondent's report from Ouagadougou. We begin in Algeria, where this Friday more than 1 million protesters took to the streets of the capital, Algiers, calling for President Abdelaziz Bouteflika to abandon plans to run for a fifth term in office. Now, women and men poured onto the city's main boulevards for the third consecutive Friday, while nationwide the number of protesters was estimated at 10 million. More than a dozen political parties and unions have now got behind the growing street protests. This as several members of the ruling FLN party resign. Well, today's protest, of course, marking International Women's Day. Have a listen to what some of the women at the protest had to say.
I am saying no to the regime. We need a better future for our children. We haven't lived good lives, but we want our children to live a better life.
We want to bring down the regime. The problem is the regime. They've taken Bouteflika hostage. He's ill, he can't speak. He breathes with artificial help.
Well, to bring us more on this, France 24's Myriam Amelas joins us here in the studio. Myriam, good to have you. A massive mobilisation, as we could see there in those images. Women out in force, but it's fair to say they've been present since the very start of these protests.
Absolutely. We can say that today is almost an ordinary Friday comparing to the two last ones, of course. Women were very present, but they were mobilized as the last Fridays. It was extremely important. There were, according to people and different sources in Algiers, more than 1 million protesters in the capital. According to those protesters and some witnesses, the demonstration was as large as the one organized to celebrate the independence in 1962, which is extremely important. Concerning women, they were present today, probably more in some areas, maybe more conservative areas, but in the capital and important cities of the country, they were as present as the other days.
So a familiar sight, as you say, women taken to the streets. They've got a lot to say as well. It's also key, in a sense, they remind of the crucial role that women have played in Algeria.
Look at this woman. She is Jamila Bouhired. She's a heroine of the independence war. She was condemned to death penalty by the French colony when Algeria was a French colony. And she is a symbol in Algeria, but also in the Arab world, for the international community. She was here. She was also she took part to the demonstration last Friday. She took part today. Her presence is important because she is kind of continuity with the other women. She has done her battle in the past, and today she's here with the other women who wants to make things change in Algeria. What is important, for example, I could join some people and some women protesters in Algiers this morning. One of them told me, my father used to offer me roses for the International Women's Day, and today he offered me a flag that belongs to my uncle who died during the independence war. He told me that today it's your turn. You have to wave it in the demonstration. You have to do your job. Your generation have to obtain a kind of new independence, and that was the message today. And what is also interesting to notice is that it was peaceful today.
Peaceful, and as you say, a strong message coming from the capital, Algiers, but equally nationwide. Myriam Amelas, thank you. In other news, the French President Emmanuel Macron has handed the first Simone Veil Prize to Cameroonian rights activist Aissa Doumara for her work against forced marriages. Now, Doumara was obliged to marry when she was just 15 years old, but she insisted on continuing her studies and went on to help form an association combating violence against women. Doumara then turned her attention to assisting victims of Boko Haram extremists. The Simone Veil Award is dedicated to the late French minister and abortion campaigner. Owen Barnell reports.
A recognition of decades of service. 47-year-old Cameroonian rights activist Aissa Doumara, awarded for her work with women victims of rape and forced marriage.
Holding this prize in my hands, I'm reminded of all the stories I've heard and conversations I've had with the women who come to my centre every day to look for shelter. I have worked to ensure that no woman has to experience violence or is obliged to bend to someone else's will under pressure just because she was born a woman.
Doumara is the first to win the Women's Rights Award, created last year by President Emmanuel Macron in honour of French rights campaigner Simone Veil.
The prize which is presented to you, Madame, and through you to all those who work by your side, will enable your association to multiply its activities, to promote the way you fight against violence and forced marriage in other places in Africa.
At the age of 15, Doumara was married against her will. 9 years later, she helped found a local branch of the Association for the Elimination of Violence Against Women in the northern town of Maroua. It has helped hundreds of women survivors of rape and forced marriage. Doumara later worked with the victims of Boko Haram extremists. On Friday, Macron said France will give €120 million to support the battles fought by women's rights activists like Doumara around the world. Doumara herself will receive €100,000 for the Simone Veil Award.
Now, ever wondered what it would be like to switch roles with a member of the opposite sex for a day? Well, on International Women's Day in Burkina Faso, that's precisely what can happen. In the mid-1980s, the country's then President Thomas Sankara called on citizens to celebrate the event. Since then, some families have taken the tradition very seriously indeed. Our correspondents report from the capital, Ouagadougou.
For the past 10 years, on March 8th, Robert gets up at the crack of dawn to tidy the house. He starts by sweeping the courtyard before moving on to some light dusting. Everything has to be spick and span before seeing to his 3-year-old son, as on every International Women's Day, today his wife's calling the shots.
My wife woke me up at 5 o'clock this morning. So I asked her why, and she reminded me that it was her day. I told her there was no problem. She asked me to make her breakfast, so I did as I was told, because it's their day. Then she told me what to cook, so I'm going to go to the market soon, to respect her wishes.
Robert's friend Ishmael is also ready to do his part for International Women's Day.
I put this on because I have to go to the market. Today's the day women give us the money to do the shopping. It's a switch of roles.
The two friends jump on a motorbike and quickly head off. They're not the first ones this morning that have come to do their shopping.
All morning there have been a lot of men coming to buy groceries because their wife gave them money to go shopping. We'd like it if our husbands came to buy vegetables more often and cooked for us.
Back home, Robert has no time to lose. Under his wife's watchful gaze, he starts preparing their meal. Odile would like this tradition to become more of a daily occurrence.
From time to time, I would like him to help us with our daily chores. Not only on March 8th, but from time to time, so he can see how we manage to support the family.
The March 8th tradition was introduced in Burkina Faso by former President Thomas Sankara in the mid-1980s and has been widely accepted by Burkinabe men. It just remains to be seen if it's repeated more often over the course of the year.
Now, 18 months on from the Me Too movement, women are growing in confidence when it comes to denouncing sexual harassment. We've begun seeing the equivalent of Me Too in Africa with the Même pas peur or even Not Afraid movement. At the recent FESPACO Film Festival in Burkina Faso, 2 actresses highlighted sexual harassment in the African film industry. In neighbouring Ivory Coast, anti-harassment initiatives are also making waves.
It's the dress rehearsal for these amateur actresses. They're hoping to do justice to the now world-famous theatre piece, The Vagina Monologues, which has come to be seen as a pillar of feminism.
Ma mini-jupe n'est pas un laissez-passer pour me violer. Même si dans le temps tu le fais, maintenant ça vaut que dalle.
The takings from the performance will be donated to a collective that's combating sexual abuse. The group is called Stop the Black Cat, with Black Cat in Ivory Coast referring to men who enter into a woman's room at night, typically a domestic servant, with the aim of having sex. It appears to be a common occurrence, though seldom talked about.
Through the Stop the Black Cat project and play, we're trying to break down barriers and taboos. These are things that we don't really discuss in African cultures, so we're trying to talk about them more openly and say that these things happen to everyone.
It's a sensitive subject to broach on the streets of Abidjan. Many decline to speak on camera, but all acknowledge a cultural barrier that prevents people from speaking openly about it.
The victims think that maybe if they talk about it, society is going to find it ridiculous and people will mock them.
Imagine if it's a married man who does this to a domestic worker who lives in the house. She'd be accused of being a liar, that she's trying to destroy the family. That's the African way of thinking.
This woman was 11 when she was first assaulted at night by someone known to her.
I told everyone. I even told them that he'd put his finger inside me. And my father said nothing and went back to bed. In fact, because he said nothing, others thought it was fine to do it as well.
The assaults continued for 4 years until she ran away from home. She's getting over the experience, though has never brought charges. As is the case in many parts of the world, women here see little point. It's a feeling confirmed by figures from a 2016 UN report. In Ivory Coast, less than 20% of rape charges result in a conviction.
Your Eye on Africa team is back in about 45 minutes' time. Up next, though, Charlie James is here with more international headlines. Stay tuned. You're watching France 24.